My parents left me out of the will. When I confronted, they just tried to guilt trip me. I never planned to snoop through my parents' desk drawer that Sunday afternoon. I was just looking for a stamp, one stupid stamp, to mail my cousin's birthday card. That's how life-changing moments happen sometimes, not with dramatic thunderclaps or warning signs, but with the mundane search for a postage stamp while your parents are out grocery shopping. The drawer stuck as usual. Dad refused to fix it, despite my repeated offers to pay for a carpenter. I jiggled it open, and there it was, tucked beneath the checkbook my mother hadn't balanced in 3 years, another task that inevitably fell to me, a thick manila envelope labeled Last Will and Testament, Thomas and Margaret Wood. I shouldn't have opened it. Normal boundaries and all that. But after 15 years of paying their mortgage, subsidizing their retirement, and solving every family crisis, while my younger sister Alice floated through life on their endless praise and minimal expectations, curiosity got the best of me. My hands trembled as I unfolded the document, legal jargon blurring before my eyes, until I reached the part that mattered. We, Thomas and Margaret Wood, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath all property, financial assets, and personal belongings to our daughter, Alice Marie Wood. I read it 3 times, certain I'd missed something, a paragraph about their other daughter, perhaps the one who had postponed her own dreams to keep them afloat, who had never taken a vacation because their roof always seemed to need replacing, who had remained single at 37 because every relationship eventually crumbled under the weight of her family obligations. But no, there was just that single devastating line, everything to Alice, nothing to me. Not the house I'd been paying the mortgage on since Dad's temporary disability became permanent. Not the antique jewelry collection Mom always promised would be mine someday. Not even a sentimental keepsake or token acknowledgement. I carefully refolded the will, replaced it exactly as I'd found it, and closed the drawer. Then I walked to my car, sat behind the wheel, and laughed until tears streamed down my face. Not the good kind of laughter, but the broken kind that bubbles up when the universe deals you a joke too cruel to process any other way. My name is Paige Wood. I'm 37 years old, and I just discovered that 15 years of sacrificing my life for my family earned me exactly nothing in return. Not even a mention in their will. But what happened next, that's where the real story begins. To understand why finding that will felt like a knife to my heart, you need to understand my family. The woods of Mapleton, Ohio present a perfect suburban portrait. Dad, a former high school football coach sidelined by a back injury 10 years ago. Mom, a part-time receptionist at the local dentist's office. Alice, the golden child who at 34 still finding herself through a series of abandoned careers and expensive hobbies. And me, Paige, the reliable one who moved back home after college when Dad's disability payments couldn't cover the mortgage. Just until things stabilize, Mom had said when I arrived with 2 suitcases and my accounting degree, "Your father's so proud, but we need a little help right now." That was 15 years ago. I started as a junior accountant at Wilson & Reed, eventually working my way up to senior manager. Every promotion meant more money, and somehow, more of my paycheck diverted to family expenses. Dad's medical bills, Mom's car repairs, property taxes that mysteriously couldn't be covered by their income. And Alice. Alice floated through a series of passionate career beginnings and abrupt endings. Young instructor quit after realizing morning classes started so early. Real estate agent, too much paperwork. Boutique owner closed after 6 months when inventory selection proved too stressful. Graduate student in art history withdrew because her voice wasn't being heard. Each failure was met with parental understanding. "Alice is finding her path," Mom would say, patting her hand. "She's too creative for conventional work," Dad would add, beaming at her like she'd discovered the cure for cancer instead of abandoning another job. Meanwhile, I received tax forms for Christmas and lectures about retirement planning on my birthday. "You're so good with money, Paige," they'd say, as if my financial stability was some inborn trait rather than the result of working 60-hour weeks and sacrificing every personal goal. Alice lived in a downtown loft apartment paid for by our parents via my mortgage contributions. I lived in my childhood bedroom because moving out would mean they'd lose the house. She took monthly weekend trips to recharge in Chicago or Nashville. I hadn't had a vacation in 8 years. 2 years ago, I'd reached a breaking point and tried to establish boundaries. I can't keep covering everything, I told my parents over dinner. I need to start saving for my own future. Dad looked wounded. After everything we've done for you, we gave you a stable home, a good education, which I paid for with student loans. I reminded him, loans I'm still paying off while also paying your mortgage. Mom jumped in, voice tight with disappointment. Family supports family, Paige, when you needed braces. Did we complain about the cost when you wanted those expensive math camps? Did we say no? The guilt trip worked, as it always did. I backed down, wrote another check, and buried my resentment deeper. Alice, who had been suspiciously quiet during this exchange, cornered me in the kitchen afterward. You're being selfish, she hissed. Designer purse dangling from her arm, a purse I knew cost more than my monthly student loan payment. They gave everything for us, and now that they need help, you're bean counting. That's cold, even for you. What exactly are you contributing, Alice? I'd asked, exhausted beyond anger. She'd looked genuinely puzzled. Emotional support. Obviously, not everything is about money. Paige, some of us actually care about more than spreadsheets and 401ks. That was Alice in a nutshell, breathtakingly without self-awareness, yet somehow always claiming the moral high ground. And now, sitting in my car outside our family home, I knew why she'd never worried about money. She'd always known she'd get everything in the end. But for the first time, I wasn't swallowing my hurt or burying my anger. This time, I was going to have my say. I waited until dinner. Mom had made her famous pot roast famous only because she mentioning its fame before serving it, and Dad was deep into his second beer. Alice was absent, having texted that she was networking at a wine bar with potential clients for her newest venture, personalized crystal healing sessions. I found something interesting today, I said casually, passing the potatoes to Dad. In the desk drawer. Mom froze mid-chew. Dad's beer bottle paused halfway to his lips. Your will, I continued, spearing a carrot. Quite the read. The silence was extraordinary, like all the oxygen had suddenly been sucked from the dining room. Then Mom recovered, her smile tight and artificial. Oh, that old thing. It needs updating, obviously. We did that years ago, when Alice was going through that terrible breakup. Remember, Thomas, when we were worried about her mental state. Dad nodded too enthusiastically. Right, just a precaution. Been meaning to revisit that. I set down my fork. The document was notarized 6 months ago. Another silence, heavier this time. Mom's smile cracked around the edges. Well, she said finally, these things are complicated. Paige, you understand finances, assets, distributions, tax implications. I understand being erased, I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded when my heart was hammering against my ribs. I understand paying the mortgage on a house that you've explicitly stated I will never own. I understand funding Alice's finding herself adventures for 15 years, only to discover I don't even rate a mention in your will. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Now, Paige, it's not like that. Alice needs more protection, financial security. You've always been the capable one. There it was, the familiar refrain. Alice needs, Alice requires, Alice deserves. While Paige can handle it. Paige will manage. Paige doesn't need anything. Let me make sure I understand, I said, folding my napkin precisely. I've contributed over $200,000 to this household since moving back. I've covered medical bills, property taxes, home repairs, and daily expenses. I've put my life on hold while Alice has lived in an apartment I indirectly pay for. And your reasoning for leaving everything to her is that she's incompetent. Don't be crude, Mom snapped. We're not discussing Alice's lifestyle choices right now. Actually, we are. We're discussing how my stability has been taken for granted, while her instability has been rewarded at every turn. Dad pushed his plate away. You're making this ugly, Paige. That's not how we raised you. I laughed a genuine laugh this time, because the absurdity had finally overwhelmed the hurt. You raised me to believe that family meant something, that sacrifice and responsibility mattered. Clearly, I misunderstood the lesson. I stood, suddenly unable to spend another minute at that table. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. I need to think about some things. Mom's expression shifted to panic. But who will take care of the insurance paperwork tomorrow? Your father's medication claim was denied again. And you know I can't make sense of those forms. The fact that this was her immediate concern, not my feelings, not the betrayal, but who would handle the paperwork told me everything I needed to know. I'm sure Alice can help with that, I said, grabbing my purse. After all, she's getting the house. I spent the night in a surprisingly comfortable hotel room, staring at the ceiling and doing calculations in my head. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and made an appointment with a financial advisor named Melissa Chen. Let me get this straight, she said after I explained my situation. You've been paying your parents' mortgage and expenses since your 20s, but your name isn't on any of their assets. I nodded, shame heating my face. It sounded so ridiculous when stated plainly. And now you've discovered they plan to leave everything to your sister, who contributes nothing. Another nod. Melissa leaned back in her chair. Ms. Wood, can I be blunt? You're being exploited, financially and emotionally. No one had ever put it so bluntly before. Exploited. The word hung in the air between us, uncomfortable but undeniable. What do? I asked, feeling both lost and strangely liberated. First, you stop the bleeding, she said, pulling out a notepad. Let's go through every automatic payment, every bill you're covering, every loan that was never repaid. By the end of our 2-hour session, I had a clear picture of just how much of my income was going to my family, 47%. Nearly half of everything I earned was being funneled into supporting people who didn't even value me enough to acknowledge me in their will. Here's your homework, Melissa said, handing me a folder. Cancel these automatic transfers, close these joint accounts, and most importantly, find an apartment. You need physical and financial separation. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in years. That afternoon, I toured 3 apartments and signed a lease on a 1-bedroom with a small balcony overlooking a park. The rent was reasonable, especially considering I was about to give myself a 47% raise by cutting off my parents' support. When I returned to my parents' house to pack, Mom was waiting, arms crossed. Your father's medication claim was rejected again, she said instead of hello. Where have you been? Finding an apartment, I replied, heading for the stairs. She followed me, voice rising. An apartment? What are you talking about? I'm moving out this weekend. Her face paled. You can't be serious. Because of one little misunderstanding about the will. We said we'd fix it. I continued up the stairs. It's not just the will, Mom. It's 15 years of being taken for granted. 15 years of watching Alice get everything, while I get nothing but more responsibilities. That's not fair. We've given you a home, food, family. I turned on the landing, looking down at her. No, Mom, I've given you those things. I've paid for this home, bought most of the groceries, and maintained this family, while you and Dad focused all your attention and resources on Alice. After everything we've done for you, name one thing, I interrupted, suddenly tired of this familiar guilt trip. One thing you've done for me in the last decade that wasn't actually me doing something for you. Her mouth opened and closed, but no examples emerged. That's what I thought, I said quietly, continuing to my room. I packed methodically, taking only what was undeniably mine. Clothes, personal items, the few pieces of furniture I'd purchased myself. It was shocking how little I actually owned despite 15 years of full-time employment. Dad came home as I was loading my car. He watched from the driveway, arms folded, expression thunderous. Your mother's upset, he said, as if this were entirely my fault. I know. This is an overreaction, Paige. You always were the dramatic one. I nearly dropped the box I was holding. In what universe had I ever been the dramatic one? Alice once locked herself in her room for 3 days because Mom bought the wrong shade of blonde hair dye. I had worked through pneumonia to finish year-end accounting reports. Dad, I've paid your mortgage for a decade. I've covered medical bills, car repairs, property taxes. I've managed your finances, handled insurance claims, and organized your retirement planning, all while working full time and watching Alice receive endless support for doing nothing. And then I discover you've left everything to her in your will. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. It's complicated. Paige, Alice needs to grow up. I finished. And so do you and Mom. I won't be your safety net anymore. As I closed my trunk, his expression shifted from anger to fear. What exactly does that mean? He asked, voice suddenly uncertain. It means I'm canceling the automatic mortgage payment. It means I won't be covering the property tax bill next month. It means you and Mom need to figure out how to live within your actual means, or sell this house and downsize. You can't just abandon us, he shouted, panic replacing indignation. We're your parents. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a surge of clarity. I'm not abandoning you. Dad, I'm just stopping my subsidy. There's a difference. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. He stood in the driveway, looking smaller somehow, like a child whose favorite toy had been taken away. Not because he loved me and would miss me, but because his comfortable lifestyle was suddenly in jeopardy. It should have hurt more, that realization. Instead, it felt like confirmation that I was making the right choice. The fallout was swift and predictable. First came the guilt trips, tearful voicemails from Mom about how they couldn't sleep, how they might lose the house. How could I do this to my own family? Then came the flying monkeys, distant relatives calling to tell me how disappointed they were in my selfish behavior, none of them aware that I'd been bankrolling my parents for years. Then came Alice. She showed up at my new apartment 3 days after I moved in, somehow having obtained my address from Mom. She looked as polished and put together as always. Designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, manicure fresh and flawless. What the hell is wrong with you? She demanded when I opened the door. Mom and Dad are falling apart. I stepped aside. Come in, Alice. Let's talk about exactly what's happening. She stalked into my apartment, looking around with barely concealed disdain at my modest furnishings. This is what you left them for, this student housing. I smiled, refusing to take the bait. Did Mom and Dad explain the situation to you about how I've been paying their mortgage for the past decade? Alice rolled her eyes. They said you've helped out sometimes. Big deal. That's what family does. Help out sometimes, I echoed. Alice, I've contributed over $200,000 to that household. Nearly half my income has gone to supporting our parents while you've lived rent-free in an apartment they subsidize, which means I've indirectly been paying for your lifestyle too. She scoffed. You're so obsessed with money. It's not about money. It's about reciprocity. It's about appreciation. It's about the fact that I discovered they've left everything to you in their will, despite all I've contributed. That made her pause. A flash of guilt crossed her face before she recovered. That's between them and their estate planner. I didn't ask for that. But you're not surprised, I noted. You knew. She examined her manicure, avoiding my eyes. They mentioned it a while back. I told them they should include you too, for what it's worth. How generous, I replied dryly. And now that I've stopped subsidizing everyone, what's your plan? Are you stepping up to cover the mortgage, the property taxes, Dad's medical bills? Alice looked genuinely startled, as if this thought had never occurred to her. I'm between projects right now, she said defensively. You know my crystal healing business is just getting off the ground. I can't possibly. Exactly, you can't or won't. But you expect me to continue indefinitely, even knowing I get nothing in return, not even their gratitude. She paced my small living room, agitation growing. So what? This is some kind of revenge making them suffer because your feelings are hurt. This isn't revenge, Alice. It's boundaries. I'm simply stopping a pattern that hasn't been healthy for any of us. Mom and Dad need to live within their means or make different choices. You need to support yourself instead of enjoying an adult allowance. And I need to start building my own life after putting mine on hold for 15 years. They could lose the house, she insisted. They could sell it and buy something more affordable, I countered. Or one of you could get a stable job and contribute. There are options that don't involve me sacrificing my future. Alice stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I barely recognize you, she finally said. You've always been cold, but this is next level. I laughed, genuinely amused by her perspective. Cold, I've financially supported our entire family for most of my adult life. I've worked 60-hour weeks while you've bounced between passion projects. I've never taken a vacation. I've ended relationships because no one wants to compete with my family obligations. That's not cold, Alice. That's the opposite of cold. Then why stop now? Why punish them like this? I sighed, suddenly tired of the conversation. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply saying that it's someone else's turn to step up. Maybe yours. She blanched at the suggestion. I can't afford their mortgage. I'm still finding my path. You're 34, Alice. Maybe it's time to pick a path and walk it. She left in a huff, promising that this isn't over and that I'd regret treating family this way. I closed the door behind her, leaned against it, and felt something unexpected relief. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't responsible for everyone else's problems. The sensation was foreign but intoxicating, like taking a deep breath after years of shallow ones. The next few weeks were transformative. I decorated my apartment exactly as I wanted, not worrying about anyone else's preferences. I joined a hiking group that met on Saturdays, something I could never do before, because weekends were always consumed by my parents' needs. I even went on a date with a colleague I'd been attracted to for months, but never had the time or energy to pursue. Meanwhile, the situation at my parents' house deteriorated. The mortgage payment bounced. The power was shut off for 2 days until they scraped together enough to pay the minimum. Dad's medication ran out before they could afford the copay for more. The calls and texts grew increasingly desperate. Paige, the property tax bill came. We don't have the money. Your father's back is worse without his medication. Is that what you wanted? The roof is leaking, and we can't afford repairs. Are you happy now? Each message twisted the knife of guilt. But I held firm. This wasn't about making them suffer. It was about breaking a dysfunctional pattern that had consumed half my life. A month into my new independence, Mom showed up at my door unannounced. She looked older somehow, the lines around her eyes deeper, her shoulders slightly stooped. She'd always been careful about her appearance, but today her hair was unstyled and her clothes wrinkled. Can I come in? She asked, voice small. I hesitated, then nodded. She sat stiffly on my couch, hands clasped in her lap. Your father's doctor called. His blood pressure is dangerously high without his medication. I waited, knowing this was leading somewhere. We need $240 for his prescription, she finally said, just until next month when my hours is increased at the dentist's office. I studied her face, the face I'd been trying to please for 37 years, always hoping for approval that never quite materialized. What about Alice? I asked. Have you asked her for help? Mom's eyes flickered. She's going through a tough time. Her crystal business isn't taking off like she hoped. So she said no. She doesn't have it to give, Mom snapped, then immediately composed herself. Not everyone is as financially minded as you are, Paige. Some people have different gifts. There it was again, the double standard that had defined my entire life. My responsibility versus Alice's exemption. I stood and went to my desk, where I wrote a check for exactly $2. Here, I said, handing it to her, for Dad's medication, nothing else. Relief flooded her face. I knew you wouldn't let him suffer. Deep down, you've always been the good one. Stop! My voice was sharper than intended. I'm not the good one. I'm not your personal bank. I'm your daughter, Mom, just like Alice is your daughter. The difference is you've never expected anything from her while expecting everything from me. Mom's expression hardened. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked Alice to contribute financially? When was the last time you thanked me for everything I've done instead of just assuming I'd do more? When was the last time you treated us equally in any respect? She stood abruptly. I didn't come here to be attacked. No. You came here for money. There's a difference. I gestured to the check in her hand. That's for Dad's health, which I care about despite everything. But moving forward, you and Dad need to make sustainable plans that don't involve me funding your lifestyle. This isn't you, Paige. You've changed. I smiled slightly. Yes, I have, that's the point. After she left, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my small balcony. Watching the park below, young couples walked hand in hand, children played on the swings. A group of elderly men played chess at concrete tables. Normal life unfolding, the kind of life I'd put on indefinite hold to support my family. The kind of life I was finally allowing myself to have. My phone buzzed with a text from Alice. Thanks for nothing. Dad could have had a stroke. I didn't reply. Alice had never thanked me for anything I'd actually done. It seemed fitting that she'd sarcastically thank me now for what she perceived as inaction. Instead, I opened my laptop and booked a vacation, my first in nearly a decade. 2 weeks in Portugal, a country I'd always wanted to visit. The cost was substantial, but with my newly reclaimed income, it was well within my budget. As I completed the booking, another text came through, this one from my father. Your mother said you gave her enough for my pills. Thank you. It wasn't much, 2 sentences, no real acknowledgement of the larger issues at play, but it was the first genuine thanks I'd received from either of my parents in years. A tiny crack in the wall of entitlement they'd built. I typed back, You're welcome, Dad. I hope you feel better soon. It wasn't forgiveness. Exactly, it wasn't reconciliation. But it was something, a small step toward a new kind of relationship, one based on choice rather than obligation. Does she buy things awesome? 3 months passed. I took my Portugal vacation, hiked coastal trails, ate seafood at small family restaurants, and slept soundly without worrying about anyone else's problems. It was glorious. Back home, my parents adjusted slowly to their new financial reality. They'd been forced to face facts they couldn't afford their house on their actual income. After some resistance, they finally listed it for sale and found a smaller, more manageable condo closer to town. Dad had started doing part-time administrative work for his old high school, answering phones and filing paperwork in the athletics office. The income was modest but steady, and the work gave him purpose beyond watching daytime television. Mom had increased her hours at the dental office and taken on additional responsibilities, earning a small raise in the process. These weren't dramatic transformations, but they were steps towards self-sufficiency. Steps they probably should have taken a decade ago instead of relying on me as their financial crutch. As for Alice, that was the most surprising development of all. When faced with the reality of our parents' financial limitations, and the realization that I was no longer filling the gap, she'd been forced to make choices of her own. The crystal healing business had been abandoned. Shocking. I know. Instead, she'd leveraged her one consistent talent, networking and social charm, into a job in event coordination. She was now planning corporate functions for a hotel downtown, a role that actually suited her personality and skills. She was still Alice, dramatic, self-centered, prone to exaggeration, but she was paying her own rent for the first time in her adult life. Baby steps. One Sunday afternoon, I received an unexpected text from Mom. Family dinner at our new place, 5 p.m. No agenda, just food. I hesitated. Our communication had been minimal these past months, practical exchanges about their move, brief updates about health matters, but nothing substantial, certainly no real reckoning with the years of imbalance and the will that had finally pushed me to my breaking point. After some consideration, I replied, I'll bring dessert. The condo was small but tasteful, with far less clutter than their previous home. Mom had been forced to downsize her collection of decorative plates and figurines, keeping only the most cherished pieces. Alice arrived shortly after I did, brighter and more animated than I'd seen her in years. You won't believe this client I just signed, she announced without preamble. Tech startup with actual funding. Their holiday party budget is insane. She launched into details about the venue and catering options, genuinely excited about her work, perhaps for the first time ever. I found myself smiling despite our complicated history. There was something refreshing about seeing her energy directed towards something productive, rather than another doomed venture or manipulative scheme. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. The conversation stayed light, focusing on neighborhood news and innocuous topics. No one mentioned money, the will, or the dramatic changes of the past few months. It wasn't until dessert, the cheesecake I'd brought from their favorite bakery, that Mom cleared her throat nervously. "We have something to show you both," she said, nodding at Dad. He went to a drawer and returned with a document that I recognized immediately. A will. A new one, judging by the fresh creases in the paper. "We updated it," he said, handing copies to both Alice and me. "We wanted you to see it before it goes into the safety deposit box." I unfolded the document with caution, bracing myself for disappointment despite their apparent good intentions. I scanned through the legal jargon until I reached the key section. "We, Thomas and Margaret Wood, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath our assets equally to our daughters, Paige Elizabeth Wood and Alice Marie Wood, to be divided with the following considerations." What followed was a detailed breakdown ensuring equitable distribution of both monetary assets and sentimental items. Mom's jewelry collection was specifically designated to be shared between us, with particular pieces named for each. Dad's small boat, his pride and joy, would go to whoever wanted it, with financial compensation to the other if neither wanted to sell it. It was thoughtful, balanced, and completely unlike the previous will I'd discovered. I looked up to find both my parents watching me anxiously. "This is thorough," I said finally. Dad nodded. "Your mother and I have had a lot of time to think these past few months about patterns we created, expectations we placed unfairly on you, dependencies we allowed to form." Mom reached across the table and touched my hand hesitantly. "We took you for granted, Paige, for years. We just assumed you'd always be there to fix everything, pay for everything, manage everything." While giving Alice a pass, I added quietly. Alice squirmed in her seat, but, surprisingly, didn't interrupt. "Yes," Mom acknowledged, the admission clearly difficult for her. "We had different standards for you both, different expectations. It wasn't fair." "It wasn't just unfair," I replied, finding my voice. "It was devastating. Do you know what it feels like to give everything you have and still be considered less valuable than someone who gives nothing?" Dad looked down at his hands. "We never meant to make you feel that way." "Intent doesn't change impact," I said. "You've shaped our entire adult lives with your choices, encouraging Alice's dependency while exploiting my responsibility." Alice cleared her throat. "I played a role too." Her voice was unusually subdued. "I took advantage of all of you. I knew you'd always cover for me, clean up my messes, pay my bills." I blinked in surprise. This level of self-awareness was unprecedented from my sister. She continued, not meeting my eyes. "When they sold the house, when you stopped covering everything, it was the first time I had to face real consequences. And it sucked," she laughed shakily. "But it also forced me to figure some things out, find a real job, grow up a little." Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "We're trying to do better, to be more conscious of how we've hurt you. This new will is just a small step." I looked down at the document again, this tangible acknowledgement of my value, my place in the family. It couldn't erase 15 years of imbalance, but it was something, a beginning. "Thank you," I said finally. "This means something to me." We finished dessert in thoughtful silence. As I prepared to leave, Dad pulled me aside. "Paige, I want you to know I'm proud of you, not just for your financial success or how you've helped us. I'm proud of you for finally standing up for yourself, for demanding better treatment. It shouldn't have taken this to make us see what we were doing, but I'm grateful you forced us to look." His words, so simple, so belated, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. All I'd ever wanted was to be seen, to be valued for who I was, not just what I could provide. "I'm still figuring out what our relationship looks like going forward," I told him honestly. "I can't go back to how things were." He nodded. "We don't expect that. We're just hoping for a chance to build something healthier, if you'll give us that chance." As I drove home that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was magically resolved. Real healing would take time and consistent effort from all of us. Not because I expected perfection going forward. Old patterns have a way of reasserting themselves when guards drop. But because for the first time in my adult life, I'd set boundaries and they'd been respected. I demanded recognition and received it. I'd refused to be exploited and exploited myself. And my world hadn't collapsed. it had expanded. My name is Paige Wood. I'm 37 years old. For 15 years, I gave everything to a family that took me for granted, this day to granted, but today, I'm building a life based on reciprocity and respect, one where I matter not for what I can give, but for who I am. The greatest revenge against people who don't value you isn't making them suffer. It's creating a life so full and free that their approval becomes irrelevant. A life where you're no longer waiting for acknowledgement because you've already given it to yourself. I'm still at the beginning of that journey, still learning what it means to put myself first after years at the bottom of my own priority list. But one thing is certain, I will never again build my life around people who see me as nothing more than a resource to be drained. And that certainty feels like freedom.